Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to do a sort of short filler, what I consider, well, filler slash warm-up video, because, yeah, I've just been kind of miserable the last couple days for no particular reason than other than, like, my brain has randomly decided to be miserable for 4 days straight. So, screw you, BuildZoid. So, yeah, anyway, I'm hoping to be mostly over that because there's, like, stuff I need to do. Being, and hating everything for existing is counterproductive to getting things done. So, yeah, as you may imagine. So, anyway, warm up video. Here we have a card. It may look a lot like a MSI GPU, but it is not an MSI GPU. It is an Asus GPU that has quite a bit of history over on this channel. So this is a 780 Ti DirectCU 2 that was sent to me by a fan a long time ago because it was very, very dead. And the reason why it was very, very dead is there's a great big crack in the PCB right. Actually, with this camera, I might be able to give you a really good look at that. Ooh. Zoom in. Nope, wrong. There we go. Yeah, so you can see the crack in the PCB right there. Right, and so that severed a whole bunch of stuff. The card doesn't have fan control, as I've now realized that now that I have a heatsink on it with actual like GPU fan header compatible fans, I've realized, wait a minute, there's no fan control. But it might also be because this normally has a 5-pin header and I'm using a 4-pin set of fans, and I've like adapted the header to go for 4 pins, but whatever, we'll get to that. But yeah, so there's no fan control, but so these fans are constantly maxed out all the time when this is running, which surprisingly enough, these aren't actually that loud. Yeah, like there's a lot of GPUs where if you crank the fan speed to 100%, like it is loud, right? And then with this, I mean, yeah, it's audible, but it's not as bad as a lot of the other cards in my collection where if you hit max, like I think this tops out at like 3.5k RPM or something, like relatively low, because some of the other cards, like you crank them up and it's just, it sounds like a jet taking off. And I don't even mean the blower cards, like no, like you can get even axial cards with just like thick, somewhat taller fans, somewhat smaller diameter, and much higher RPM. And it was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's gonna be loud as hell. So anyway, yeah, now it has this MSI heatsink on it, but cracked PCB. So the issue with that cracked PCB is the main problem with that is it took out the 5-volt power rail, which actually, there's a 5-volt linear regulator over here, which converts 12 volts into 5 volts. That is then fed over to the other side of the card through a trace that was obviously destroyed by the crack to this side of the card, and that then powers the VRM. Other issues with the card included that, the crack disabled actually caused some issues with identifying that the 8 pins are plugged in, so I needed to override that, which was done by removing some transistors. So now the card is incapable of detecting if the 8 pins are plugged in or not. Other than that, what else do we have? Oh yeah, there's no power limit on this thing. Apparently, I need to investigate this more, but somebody already told me, or not me directly, but told on a Discord channel that I'm part of, on a Discord server that I'm on. Somebody mentioned that apparently if you just disconnect the INA 3221 current monitoring chip on NVIDIA cards, that apparently lifts the power limit as well, which is like, okay, that's very interesting, because that has given me some really bad ideas that I want to test on, especially the 20 series, because if on the 20 series, instead of having to mod a million shunts, there's like 5 shunts on a 2080 Ti, I think. No, there's like 6 or something. It's there's a ridiculous number of shunt resistors on 20 series NVIDIA cards. But if you can just desolder the current monitoring chips and that disables the power limit, I mean, how much easier could it be? But yeah, this has no power limit. This actually doesn't have any power monitoring either. So yeah, I guess that like with this card that works. The 3221. Evidently the connection was running along the bottom edge of the card and got caught with the crack in the PCB. Anyway, because the PCB is cracked and in a sort of sketchy condition where if you tweak the PCB slightly the wrong direction, it stops working. That's why I have these 12 standard wire gauge wires running along the card, and this is like a solid copper wire. There's no strands to that. So the purpose of that is just to act as reinforcement for the PCB, so it prevents it from flexing so much because, yeah, like the thing is that crack, like you tweak the PCB a little bit and it actually stops the card from booting. As I recently, and I actually really screwed this up, so basically this is acting as bracing. I actually screwed up this lower brace the first time I did this because I had this idea a while ago because I had the card resurrected and then I got into doing some 780 Ti stuff and I was using this card for like modding, capacitor modding, which unfortunately I lost all of the data because I had data before any mods and well, I never recorded it. But basically, I did the cap mods and the bracing at the same time. And the lower brace that I did was actually trying, like, I intentionally set it up to sort of pull the PCB straight, which was a big mistake, as I recently learned, because for like I was working on a GTX 480 e-power that was successful. You're probably going to see a video about that very, very soon. But yeah, I was working on a GTX 480 e-power, and I was like, yeah, I have all this copper wire on this dead 780 Ti. That's kind of a waste of copper wire. Let's just take the copper wire off of it. And when I did that, just, I got the GTX 480 working and I was done with the GTX 480 and I was thinking to myself, well, let's just check if this 780 Ti hasn't randomly decided to start working again. So, I attach a heatsink to it, I stick it in a system and bam, it boots. And I'm like, oh, you've got to be kidding me, right? Like, now you work for when I was trying to get it to work, it wasn't. Because the thing is like everything initialized on the card always. It was just like, yeah, for some reason it didn't want to run. But now it runs again. So that's great. And I was messing with like taping off pins and stuff to try get it. Like I was thinking maybe there's an issue with the PCIe connection being screwed up. But no, it's just like you bend the PCB the wrong way and it stops freaking working. So since then, I actually like this brace doesn't actually like the previous one was putting some tension on the PCB to get it back into what I considered like straight, more PCB shape. Because right now, if you look at it, it's not quite as obvious, but like this is not a straight PCB. Like it is very clearly like bent this way, or more like the PCIe slot is out of alignment with the actual PCB itself. So yeah, I was trying to get it straight. Well, this brace right now doesn't actually put any tension on it. It just sort of holds it in the position that it naturally sits in because apparently that's the position it likes to be in order to function. So yeah, it works again. And so now that it started working again, I was thinking, well, I'd like to get this card into a sort of more card shape. I don't really want to be stuck using like Morpheus heatsinks on it all the time. And I have a pile of these, well, not pile of these, but I do have two of these MSI GPU heatsinks, I think off of 980 Ti's for both of them, or I think it might be a 780 Ti and a 980 Ti, but basically I have two of these heatsinks for a similar reason as this. Like this card was fan mail. These actually came with other cards that were fan mail where it was like dead 780 Ti's, dead 980 Ti's. I didn't manage to repair those because one of them basically had a completely I can't remember what was wrong with there was two. I can't remember what happened to one of them, but the other one had a completely like grenaded GPU core where it was just like there was underfill missing from the core, which I've never seen before. Like I've seen cores where somebody's like cracked them somehow, but this core was like it looked like it had exploded under the core and then blown the underfill off to the side. Anyway, we should take this apart so some people are probably like, what's an underfill? So yeah, I have these two heatsinks spare, and I was thinking, well, since this thing has decided to start running again, I'd like to get it into more GPU-like condition, because I do have two 780 Ti classifieds, and it's like, well, it would be kind of cool to run three-way SLI with this. Also, there's some like glue left over from where the Asus had plastic spacers on there. But those are gone now. But the glue's left, like the glue was still left over, so that's why these aren't coming off, which is fine. The thing is, I have a whole bunch of spare mounting hardware from various GPUs I've taken apart, because I sometimes buy GPUs just to like rip off heatsinks or steal VRMs and that kind of thing. So I tend to I have spare heatsinks, I have spare heatsink hardware. The issue is for idiot me, instead of keeping the heatsink hardware with the heatsinks, decided to just chuck all the heatsink hardware into a box. So it's like it takes a while to like fish out a set of 4 screws that are actually like the same tension. Because these are spring loaded, so the same spring tension. Yeah, not really fun to find find all of those, but the cool thing is, and whoa, I forgot how much thermal paste I threw on here. Um, but yeah, the thing is, yeah, okay, you're not gonna see the underfill because it's all covered in thermal paste. But basically, like, one of the cards one of the cards with this heatsink that I had, which I think I still have the VRM off of that one, but basically it blew out like the side of the core, like literally where you normally have that sort of like, well, there's thermal paste on it right now, so yeah, you're not gonna see it. But if you ever look at a GPU core, it doesn't stop as a hard edge, right? Like the die itself is an actual like the I don't know what to describe. Like it's basically like it has a sharp edge to it, and then there's the underfill, which actually sort of smooths that out and gives this like concave basically on the edges. Yeah, so that was actually like blown out on one of the 780 Ti's or 980 Ti's. I can't remember what core was on there. It was just like, heatsink and VRM, that's all I care about because the core wasn't getting saved anytime soon. But yeah, so I got this heatsink and I decided, well, I'd like this card to run it in like 3-way SLI because I do have a bunch of other 780, like I have the two 780 Ti classifieds, and one of those actually has a core that's also really like sketchy condition. So I was just like, okay. Anyway, wanted to get a heatsink for this so that, you know, it wasn't stuck being just like a bare PCB where I had to run a Morpheus all the time. And yeah, so I decided to adapt one of these because MSI actually has a kind of like I think what's going on is MSI actually has the core offset far more to the like this way because this part of the heatsink, right, this area where you can see the great big gash I put into there, yeah, that doesn't clear this DVI port. So basically, I just snipped off the fins over there. I don't need it to be pretty. I just need it to work, right? Like honestly, this thing is not like this thing's a disaster as is. So, you know, and actually like the capacitors on the back are like capacitors that I saved off of other random GPUs. Like this is pretty Frankenstein. The only way this could get worse is if I replace the VRM with the VRM from a different GPU. But I'm not going to do that because the VRM on this is halfway decent and I don't see like that's a lot of effort for not a lot of reward with a card where like the PCB is liable to just kill the thing at random whenever. So yeah, it's if anything, I'm just waiting for this to finally permanently kick the bucket and then steal the VRM off of this because this is actually pretty decent if it wasn't for the fact that this is a 780 Ti and this is an 8-phase using like these aren't terrible MOSFETs, but they're not like the greatest MOSFETs ever made. And 780 Ti's are basically one of the power hungriest GPUs ever made. So you know, like that doesn't really work out. That doesn't really work out so well. But yeah, the thing is just like, oh, and there's no VRM cooling, which is kind of a concern with this thing, but it's like, if you just run short benchmarks, it's fine. But yeah, so anyway, cut a hole in there to get the heatsink to fit. Also, Asus uses a 5-pin fan header, so if you zoom in, you can see how, actually, can you? Yeah, you can. So, if you look at the fan header, zoom in some more. Oh man, this camera is great. No? Okay, I think I have it. Yeah, okay, had a bit too much zoom, but you can sort of see how there's like a pin that's not aligned with the actual plastic. Yeah, because normally this card has a 5-pin header, except this is a 4-pin, like the heatsink. The heatsink is a 4-pin connector. So, come on, camera. I believe in you. I think I put it too close. Yeah, so that's a 4-pin connector. And obviously that doesn't fit on a 5-pin connector of the card. So I pulled off the plastic, just, you know, sort of levered it off with a knife. And then once I got it off, I trimmed it. I trimmed off the extra pin because it's like, I don't know what that pin does. Quite frankly, I don't need that pin either because I checked which ones were ground and 12 volts. I got those for my, you know, fan header because you can see yellow is 12 volts, black is ground. And so I just checked off that, hey, I have my 12 volt, like my 12 volt pin is where my 12 volt wire goes. My ground pin is where my ground goes. And then I just cut off the extra pin because don't need that one. Adapted the actual connector, so that's actually chopped up as well. Like everything about this card is just like chopped up to hell because it's just like, well, I mean, this thing is a kind of a pile of unreliable garbage, and I'm really surprised that it still runs anymore. But yeah, so you can see how the side of that is just cut off because basically I decided, well, now that I've adapted that to a 4-pin, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally, like if I'm reassembling it, accidentally plug this thing in wrong. Now, you still can, but now that the header doesn't have a bunch of unoccupied space in it, right? Like it just ends at this point instead of where it would normally end, which would be 1 pin more. It kind of implies that you should plug it in all the way instead of like partially, which there. So that plugs in as intended. And like this, it'll actually work. So that's great. And yeah, and I could have pulled off a proper 4-pin header off of some other card, except I couldn't be bothered with looking for a PCB to rip off a 4-pin off of, especially because I don't have a use for 5-pin headers. Like as far as I know, Asus is the only one to use these, and it's like Asus cards are either not worth chopping up in the first place, like they're like, well, yeah, I can't think of a reason why I'd be messing with like fan headers on Asus cards. So that's kind of the thing with this card is just like, yeah, and this describes the condition of the card perfectly. Now, interestingly enough, the core's actually pretty decent on it, even though the performance is not that great. So, and the memory is also pretty okay. It does 1900 plus, I think it does like 1910 on the memory, and it does like 1250. I want to say it's around 1250 core on stock voltage, which the software is reporting is 1.17 volts, which there's no software voltage control for the card. Well, there's no, the card doesn't have working software voltage control, but I am planning to hard mod that. And now that this thing's working again, is just like, yeah, I can go back to modding the voltage, because the story with the actual, like the second time it died, right? So the first time it died is the original crack in the PCB, which, you know, I got it past that. But then the second time was when I added the brace. Well, when I was adding the brace, that was like the beginning of a full modding session where it was like add capacitors, add voltage control, add, well, actually voltage control is the kind of the last thing the only thing this needs, because it doesn't have a power limit by, thank you, great big Gashian PCB. Yeah, it was just a case of, I needed more power, like I just needed more voltage, and I did all of my mods, and I added the bracing, and then it was just like, oh, it doesn't work. So yeah, but now it works again, so we can do all of the voltage mods now. Unfortunately, for some reason, this card scores like significantly worse per clock compared to my my classifieds, which I'm not sure why that is, because all 3 of my cards are Hynix memory. So yeah, like this one's Hynix, the other 2 780 Ti's are also Hynix, but like this needs to be like 100 megahertz higher core clock to match the other 2 or something like that. Like this thing is slow for the clock speeds that it reports in software, and I'm not really sure why that happens. It just is, which sucks, but you know, it's not like I had any, like at this point I really don't have any major plans for this card where it'd be like Sub-Zero or something, because it's just like this thing is really, really sketchy. Now, what actually really impressed me is this heatsink, though. Though, admittedly, this thing is only running on 1.17 volts. So, yeah, without the overvoltage, of course, the heatsink's going to do a good job. But still, it's like, I was honestly, like, still a 780 Ti, and I was kind of expecting worse temperature results. But this heatsink, with admittedly the fans completely maxed out, because there's no fan control on this thing. I'm like, that's either the lack of fan control is either the connector being build-zoided up, or the PCB having the great big gash in it. One of the two basically is causing that there is no fan control, but that's fine, because it's a benching card, right? Like I wouldn't stick this into a daily system ever, because like this is liable to this is liable to stop working at random, and that area of the PC, like the cracked area of the PCB, is potentially liable to set on fire, because, actually no, the 5-volt regulator probably couldn't provide enough power to really cause any issues. I don't think there's any, I don't know. Maybe there's like a 12-volt power plane running through the area, and, you know, maybe if you tweaked it just right, you might be able to short 12 volts to ground or something, and That would suck, but actually, what's usually more concerning is V-core to ground. Because if you short V-core to ground, this has a much higher current limit than like any power supply. Like, your regular, even like a 1200 watt power supply is going to have a 100 amp current limit. A V-core VRM is going to have a current limit of like, depending on the GPU, in excess of like 200 amps. So yeah, if you short, V-core to ground, if the short isn't like very, very shorted, it's actually just going to burn straight through it, which is kind of fun. Yeah. Which I actually ran into. I accidentally wired a 18 gauge wire wrong from like V-core. Accidentally, I had it going to ground instead of back to like a different area of V-core. And actually, no, that was a grounding wire. So it was supposed to go ground to ground, but it was going ground to V-core to ground. And the end result of that was that wire just got like toasted. Well, it basically got so hot that it desoldered itself from like the incorrect connection point, which was just like, whoa. I didn't realize it was actually possible. I was expecting it to just shut down, but nope. Wire pretty much just roasted itself. Anyway, and that was an 18 gauge wire. That's like PSU wire. So yeah, I was really surprised by that. I had a bunch of smoke and like immediately hit the PSU because it's just like, wait, why is there smoke? I wasn't expecting that. No footage of that, unfortunately. Anyway, yeah, this thing works again, which is just like, it's liable to die at any time. Like if it stops working after I reassemble it for this video, then that's gonna really suck. But yeah, I'm pretty like, I just wanted to show off like here's a super Frankenstein card that I have where it's just like, like the only, well, it's still its own PCB. It's just that there's like stitches going on because yeah, was pretty. Oh, wait, which way does this? Okay, there. I'm gonna just throw the thing together. Luckily, I threw so much thermal paste on there that I don't need to apply anymore. Just use what's left over. There we go. And I can't see. What the hell is the? There we go. Ta-da! So, oh yeah. Well, I have to have the, display outputs over the edge of the desk so that, because the heatsink's lower than the than the display outputs, so it's resting on that. Go. And yeah. And the thing is, in Firestrike, this actually only hits like, I never got to the end of my point about the temperatures, right? Yeah, I don't think I did. In Firestrike, this never goes over 60 degrees. Mostly because the fan speed's maxed out, and that is also just like a Firestrike pass, because I'm not going to run this for extended periods of time, because there's no VRM cooling, right? Like, I'm not really, like, the core is probably going to be okay. The VRM, on the other hand, yeah, I need to figure out some kind of heatsink situation for the VRM, because it's currently a bit of an issue. Unfortunately, idiot me decided to use all of the screw holes around the VRM to, like, run braces and wires, so, like, the wire connecting 5 volts from the wire connecting 5 volts from the regulator, yeah, that goes through that screw hole over here. So no way to mount a heatsink through that. And then, well, these two braces go straight through the two sort of, screw holes for mounting a VRM heatsink. So that sucks. Did not think that through because I never actually, like, there was never any plans to actually run this with, like, a real GPU heatsink. That was just kind of like a spur of the moment idea where it was just like, now that it works again, I'd like it to be, like, not just a bare PCB lying around. I'd like it to actually have a heatsink for once. So that actually, like, belongs to the card. So yeah, but this is like the most, it's not really, it's technically not a zombie because it still has its own VRM, but it is pretty undead as far as like my GPU collection goes. I think this is the most undead card in it because yeah, like there's other GPUs that I've repaired, but this one is by far, I think, the sketchiest, where it's just like, yeah, this is awful because again, it just randomly died once already, so. Yeah, Anyway, I think that's it for the video. There wasn't really too much, like, yeah, unfortunately, I guess if this video was done by somebody who's more into video making than just messing with hardware, then you'd have footage of, like, the build process. But the thing is just, like, I don't like, wasting people's time showing them footage of things that don't work, right? Which admittedly, like right now you might be like, but Buildzoid, you haven't shown any proof that this actually works. Well, I guess you're just gonna have to take my word for that. But, well, no, you might end up seeing it in some benchmarks or something that I post, because it does work. It's just like like there's no point for me to run this card alone, because it just kind of sucks on its own. Yeah, it does work again, so that's pretty great. The thing is just like, yeah, I don't have footage of like the, modding the cooler or anything, because it's just like, well, it wasn't a very gentle modding process, which I guess would just add to the entertainment value of like, whoa, look at how awful, look at how badly he's butchering that heatsink. But the thing is just like, if that didn't work out and the heatsink ultimately performed terribly, then it's just like, yeah, there wouldn't be a video, so why even record that? And it was very much kind of just like, and also it's just like set up the camera and then do the whole nah. You're just gonna like that's the thing with AHOC, is just like you get to watch the end results here, not the process, because the process is often quite concerning. Even speaking as somebody who's heavily involved in the process of assembling things like this, yeah, it's concerning. As I'm doing it, I'm thinking to myself, there's a right way to do this, and the way I'm doing it is not it. Yeah. Also, you may notice that I actually cut off the tab for the PCIe connector, because that was so bent out of shape that it would not actually slot into GP. Like, it would not slot into slots anymore properly. So, yeah, this thing's just an abomination of a GPU, but it works, so that counts. At least it worked before I recorded this video, because I did actually run like tests to just check, like, hey, is the heatsink performing well? Are the fans working? Is all of the stupid crap I did to it doing what it's supposed to be? And it's just like, yeah, it does indeed work. It's just still not very good. So yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, which unfortunately, if you're thinking of like sending me fan mail of dead GPUs, I'm very sorry to say I have such a massive backlog of dead stuff and working stuff as well. That's the worst part. Like, the working stuff is the biggest concern as far as if you ask me. There's too much stuff that works that I haven't, like, literally just spends its time sitting in boxes, because there's too much of it. So yeah, at this point I'm gonna be like, unless you have something like exceptionally rare or interesting, no thanks. Okay. And by exceptionally rare yeah, just I don't know. I mean, you can still ask, but if I don't find it interesting, you're just don't expect to be like, don't expect me to accept anything, because it's just like, I have way too much stuff. Yeah, so big thanks to both of the people who, well, to the person who provided the heatsink, as well as to the person who provided the PCB, because I don't know, maybe you didn't find this video entertaining, but I certainly find, well, I guess you could say I find this card entertaining as well, because I keep working on it for some reason. So it's a great waste of time. Yeah, and that's there. So I've done the first part of the outro, so at this point, it's just like, yeah, I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me directly, and if you'd like to, and then there's also, AHOC merch on Teespring. There's stickers, posters, shirts, hoodies, socks. Yeah, if you'd like to support me through that, then there's a link to that down in the description below as well. So yeah, that's everything for this video. Like, actually everything. I'm gonna hit the stop button now. And yeah, I guess this is a really old-fashioned AHOC video because it's just so off the damn rails, isn't it? It's perfect. Okay, actually gonna hit the stop button. Goodbye.